Welcome into the Skinny Podcast. It's the weekly Potpourri edition. I'm Richard Skinner, Local12.com digital sports columnist and editor with Rick Boring. As always, it's presented by Blake the Attorney Mason. We got lots to get to on kind of a non-football week, if you will, with the Super Bowl still a week away. But as always, a ton to get to. Rick, let's get to it.
Yeah, Skinny, let's start with the Bengals as Al Golden was introduced as the new defensive coordinator. I know Bengals media, yourself got the chance to talk to him and Zach Taylor. So I guess my first question is, what were your takeaways from that meeting with Al Golden and Zach Taylor?
No nonsense. I love one of his quotes about I don't live in the gray area. He wants to make things pretty much black and white for the players. And it sounds like he wants to keep things simple for the players and just let them play fast. He talked about, his role of developing players, which is important. He played a bunch of freshmen this past year at Notre Dame, apparently. He talked about that. And if you're going to play freshmen, you better develop them, especially on a team that got all the way to a national championship game. So, listen, I'm not here to pan the hire because he doesn't have NFL coordinator experience. I'm not here to praise the hire just because of what he did at Notre Dame. The thing I do know is this: Zach Taylor better get this one right because I don't think he's going to get a chance to get one right again. This one has to be the right hire.
I heard people commenting about, it's not nepotism necessarily, but the idea that Zach Taylor is just hiring his buddy, or the Bengals are getting a discount. They're going after a guy that they're familiar with, and that's why they went after Al Golden and didn't do a quote-unquote real search around the rest of the NFL and college ranks. Skinny, I would argue, to your point that you just made, Zach Taylor is in a spot where his back is against the wall with this defensive coordinator hire. He has to have someone that he trusts. He has to have someone that he knows he's going to be on the same page with. He can't go out and get someone that, okay, the resume is great, but we didn't jive and it just didn't work out. And we wasted a year and a half, 2 years before we ever figured that out and decided to move on from each other. That will be the end of Zach Taylor's career as a head coach in the NFL, or at least with the Cincinnati Bengals, and for the foreseeable future. So I really don't have a problem with him going after a guy that he's familiar with, that he has a relationship with, and that he trusts. That really doesn't bother me in this situation. I think that's what most people would do.
Yeah, me either. Listen, he worked for the Bengals for 2 years in 2020 and 2021, so he's a part of that Super Bowl staff. Zach Taylor knows his work ethic, knows how he works. Again, the familiarity is. He even admitted it. He said it wasn't the driving force in the hire, but it certainly didn't hurt. And familiarity was talked about a bunch in that press conference between both. And again, the fact that he had 2 successful years at Notre Dame as a coordinator, I think does say something. I know it's not the NFL, but it does say something. And to the main overriding point of this is, again, the hire for Zach Taylor was made because he knows he has to get the defense turned around, because he's not going to get it. He's not getting another chance at this. If this doesn't work out playoff wise either this year or next, barring crazy circumstances from an injury standpoint, it will be Zach Taylor who will be on his way out. So you think he's just hiring a guy because he's a friend or he's familiar with him? That's the only reason? It better not be, because it'll be the wrong hire and he'll be out of a job. He's not going to risk his career for that.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't like to admit it, but they would do the same thing in that instance. When your back's against the wall and you've got to get it right, you're going to go with someone that you're comfortable with and that you trust. And in this case for Zach Taylor, that happened to be Al Golden. And Al Golden, by the way, has some chops. Like, he did just lead one of the best defenses in all of college football to the national championship game. So it's not like he's coming off a questionable year or you're grabbing him out of some obscure location or something. I mean, he is a prominent name in the sport right now and a guy who is going to get a lot of consideration.
And he's got previous coordinator experience at Virginia back in the early 2000s. That led to him getting head coaching jobs at Temple and Miami of Florida. This isn't just some no-name guy. This is a guy who was a head coach of 2 Division I football programs, was a defensive coordinator of a national runner-up team, and has coached in the NFL as a position coach. And so, again, this wasn't just a guy who's a neighbor of Zach Taylor's that he hired, although he is a neighbor of Zach Taylor's because he never moved from here. But yeah, Again, I don't know if it's a great hire. I can't say it's a bad hire. We won't know till we see the proof. So anybody who pans this or praises this, you're just stabbing at something, in my opinion. But I go back to the bottom line is Zach Taylor better get it right or have gotten it right, and that's going to be the determining factor of whether this was a good hire or not.
Yeah, you and Trags went into more detail on the nitty gritty of what he's going to need to change and all of that on the podcast you guys did earlier this week. So I won't go too much farther into that, but I do want to ask you, in terms of the position groups, I think we would agree that you're not just going to be able to remake this entire defense in
Right.
1 year. Like the way we look at it now, it's like you need help at defensive line, you need help at linebacker, you need help in the secondary. But the reality is, you're going to be able to address maybe one of those position groups well through free agency, and you'll probably draft well at one of the other position groups, but you're not going to be able to address all of them equally. What position group do you think he most needs to address on the defensive side first? And which position group do you think he'll have to say, we'll make it work with what we've got right now?
Yeah, the one that you may have to make it work with what you've got is the safety group. I just don't know if you can remake that and maybe have to add a starting linebacker depending on what they do with Jermaine Pratt if they cut him. And you also need an edge rusher. And the hope would have been that Miles Murphy can become that guy. He's not done anything really in his first 2 years. Maybe they saw enough out of Joseph Osai that they re-sign him. He's slated to be a free agent, and it probably won't cost you much to re-sign him. And maybe you can get a little bit more out of him, but I think you certainly need more there. And you still need more interior pass rush. I mean, Sheldon Rankins was brought here to do that, and he was a complete and total bust. So there's a lot of spots, Rick. And so to me, I mean, I'm going to work front to back, in my opinion, and the back end of that is the safety group, and see if you can make do with the Jordan Battle, Geno Stone tandem. Um, Al was asked on Monday about, if you've taken a look at the roster, what do you think? And it's a fair question. I kind of knew what the answer was going to be. I think we all did. It was a fair question to ask. And he said, listen, that's literally what I'm doing, is taking a dive into this. Maybe he sees something that we don't, or that he thinks he can get out of those guys on the back end, or maybe he sees Jermaine Pratt and says, just a little tweak here, I can make him the player he was for me in 2021 as opposed to the player he is right now in 2024. So I'm interested to see who they retain and who they don't. And I think that'll answer the question. I am going to do on Friday. The Athletic has that great exercise that Paul Dehner Jr. puts up of how you can redo a roster and go through the salary cap. They actually have a kind of a worksheet you can do. I'm going to be interested to see where I land financially, to see what you can do. That's the other part. Once you sign Jamar, although his money really won't kick in until next year, if you will, from a salary cap burden standpoint. What happens if you end up signing T? What money is now left over? If you extend Trey Hendrickson, how much is left over? Maybe it's not enough to remake anything, that you got to make do with what you got through the draft. That might be a sobering exercise once I get done with it, to be honest with you.
Skinny, some other Bengals news that came out this week was that Eric All will miss the entire 2025 season due to the knee injury he suffered this past year. Obviously, he has an extensive injury history going back to his college days. It is terrible for him personally, but also from a Bengals standpoint, what does this mean for how they're going to handle the tight end position this offseason?
Yeah, I thought all along they were going to try to re-sign Mike Gesicki, and I'm still in that camp. And so if you do that, you still have Drew Sample, you still have Tanner Hudson. They brought up Cam Grandy. I thought Eric All was going to be the perfect 3-down tight end for them, and hopefully he will be starting in 2026. But I still think if you re-sign Mike Gesicki, even though All did play in 9 games last year, you're kind of in an okay boat. I mean, Gesicki had a really good second half of the year, especially as a receiver. Again, then you got Sample as the blocker, Hudson as a backup pass catcher, if you will, and Grandy actually started a handful of games because they like to do weird first plays, and he's in there to block mostly. They did re-sign him a week or so ago, and maybe they re-signed him with the full knowledge that they weren't going to have Eric All for this season. So I don't think it's a huge blow, and I say that with the thought that I think Eric Hall had a chance to be a really, really good 3-down player for them. But again, you only had him for 9 games this year.
Yeah. And then, Skinny, another thing that happened this week was Kelsey Conway of the Enquirer spoke to Duke Tobin. Got quotes on Jamar Chase and Trey Hendrickson specifically, and how they're trying to handle those situations this offseason. The big takeaway here, and I'll read through the quotes quickly, but the big takeaway for me was it feels very much like they understand the Jamar Chase situation. They want to get it done as quickly as possible. The Trey Hendrickson situation, they're kind of setting us up for Trey and his party don't seem like they want to play ball with us, and we don't know where it's going from here. So we'll see how it plays out. Here was the quote on Jamar Chase. It's a priority for us, Tobin said. It's something we feel like there's a framework to work off of. Should be a pretty easy framework to work off of. Guys in his position have recently redone contracts. We believe in Jamar. He's very important to us. The other guys that have done contracts are very important to their teams. So we believe there's a real framework to work off of. I would expect that we could come together on something that makes sense for both sides. Then on Trey Hendrickson, Duke Tobin said, has he earned a pay raise and a bump in an extension? He has. We're cognizant of that, and we will give that to him. But whether we agree on what that looks like is what is yet to be determined. So give me your thoughts on those two quotes, Skinny.
Yeah, I mean, sorry for starters. I think that they do realize that they have to sign Jamar Chase no matter what. Now, again, are we now into the $42 million average value? I mean, we exceeded the Justin Jefferson money at this point by a significant margin or by a little margin. And the Trey one to me has always been they were going to offer a 1 year extension. He's under contract through 2025 through this season. You extend him by a year, you give him a healthy signing bonus to be able to prorate that, and you feel like you're done with it. I get Trey's side not wanting to be done with it. He's looking to cash in one more time. He's 30 years old. That's kind of the line of demarcation, right, in this league for guys. If you don't want to get guys into multi-year deals beyond their 30s, Trey Anderson could be a completely different animal. I mean, he takes care of himself. He still looks great. He looks physically great. In fact, he looks better than ever. So could that guy get a 3 year deal in your mind? Maybe. But again, then are you going to be tied up to a 33-year-old guy that suddenly at age 33 it goes? I think it's a real quandary. And I don't know if I see fault in either side in how this transpires. But it does sound like, to your point, they're kind of setting everybody up to may not be able to get this done. And then we're going to have to make a tough decision with Trey.
I realize there's one game in particular that is a strong rebuttal to what I'm about to bring up. And there's probably a few games that you would point out. But here would be my question to you about trying to figure out the Trey Hendrickson situation. Was the Bengals defense any good this year?
It was not.
Was Trey Hendrickson the best pass rusher in the league, or at least had the most sacks out of anybody in the NFL?
He did.
So if you give Trey Hendrickson all this money and he performs as well as he possibly can, which means he gets more sacks than anyone else in the NFL, which I would think is a pretty damn high level of performance from him. Is he actually good enough to make a difference? Like Jamar Chase, when you pay him, he wins games for you. Clearly, he is the difference maker on the field. Joe Burrow, same thing. With Trey Hendrickson, your defense still sucked with him out there. And I love him. He was awesome. He dominated a game or two, but your defense overall still sucked with Trey Hendrickson playing as well as he can possibly play. I just don't know if I can give him that type of money for a guy that even when he's amazing, and I loved watching him, he didn't really impact wins and losses all that much.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you in that regard. I mean, the sacks are great and all that, and he obviously led the league in that category. But in what games did those sacks make a difference? Right? I mean, there was a couple. Certainly the Las Vegas game, but I think you beat Las Vegas without him having 3 or 4 sacks.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I get the other faction that says, how can you let go of the best player in maybe the league, the defensive player of the year? Well, there's a lot of factors involved in all of these things. And to your point, who impacts wins and losses the most? And I just don't know. It never feels like he does. And I hate to do that because the numbers should speak for themselves and they just don't. He's also not a great end against the run, and that has to be fact. Everybody sees the sack number, right? Got 70.5 sacks. Yeah, well, you didn't do all that great against the run according to PFF. I know they're not the be all end all, but you're basically middle of the pack as a run defender, maybe even less than middle of the pack as a run defender. That teams do run the ball. That does factor into the equation.
Yeah, and like again, I love Trey Hendrickson. This is not meant to be a Trey
Right.
Hendrickson has not
Business
played
decision.
well or anything like that. But there is like when you're talking about spending this much money, you do have to go a little bit farther. And for me, to that point, I don't think he's the type of Miles Garrett or one of those dominant TJ Watt type of players that everyone panics about when they have to play him and they game plan against him and he completely destroys everything they want to do. I think he's a guy who is a really, really good pass rusher who puts up really good numbers. But at the end of the day, he's not going to dominate a game and change it in the way that some of the truly, truly elite defensive players do. And even if you want to argue that he does do that, well, okay, but the Bengals defense still stunk last year with him being great. So I just don't think you can commit that much money to him.
And it goes back to this. Everybody talks about just pay him, just pay him. You can't pay them all, man. You cannot.
Right.
I mean, in a perfect world, it would be great, but you just can't. Can you do it and not have a good football team otherwise? Sure. That's kind of where you're at the moment. You have to make that decision.
And let's not forget about what he did last offseason, right after they had given him an extension
Right.
and more money. And then last year, it's like, well, I need more. I'm not gonna play if you don't give me more. I'm gonna request a trade. He never did any of that stuff, but he did threaten it. At this point, it's kind of like, well, whatever, Trey. We'll just, we'll figure out how we have to figure it out, and we'll let you know what we do. We will talk about the Super Bowl next week. We'll do the preview next week because that game isn't going to happen for another week and a half. But the Eagles and the Chiefs did make it to the game this year. Any thoughts on the conference championships?
Yeah, I mean, Bengals played both of those teams, and I thought Philly was the best team. Them and Baltimore were the two best teams. I thought the Bengals played this season, and so Philly getting there's not a surprise, and God love Kansas City, man. They can beat you 17-16. They can beat you 27-26. They just beat you. I can't explain it. I really can't, because it's not Pat Mahomes throwing for 50 touchdowns anymore. It's
No,
Pat
it's
Mahomes
refs
making enough
throwing flags.
plays. It's the refs. It's the refs and the Chiefs defense, right?
Yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, uh, the ref thing is funny. I get the complaints. I get why everyone is mad about it. It is truly incredible how everything falls into place for them every single time they need it
Yeah.
to. Whether it be the other team screwing up easy instances, or the refs screwing up calls, or Pat Mahomes being amazing, or the defense making whatever it is, every single time they need it in a big moment, everything falls into place for them. It's truly incredible to watch.
I mean, nobody's ever three-peated. That's why it's extremely hard to do. Here they are on the cusp of doing that, and we'll talk next week. Can they do it? We'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll preview that game on next week's show. Real quick on college football before we switch gears here to the Reds, Skinny. What do you make of Ohio State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles leaving for Penn State?
Yeah, it was interesting. Don't remember during the season, wasn't it a point where Ryan Day was going to call the defense instead of Jim Knowles, and that
Right
became a
after
big
the
deal?
Oregon loss. That's
Yeah,
what I keep going back to. I think there's a rift between them because of that.
yeah, yeah. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, and then you also have the fact that he and Chip Kelly were clearly good friends. So it's like you bring in one guy who came in after Jim Knowles. He clearly becomes your right hand man. Jim Knowles, I think, was feeling a little slighted. And then you also have the situation with the fan base. You know, they lose to Oregon. He gets thrown under the bus. The whole coaching staff needs to be let go. They lose to Michigan. Same situation. Everyone wants all of them fired. I don't blame anyone on that staff who looks at it and goes, "Hey, we accomplished what we set out to accomplish. We got the title. It's only downhill from here with the fan base. They're not going to just be like, okay, that's enough. Like, we're not going to be able to do enough going forward to keep these people happy. So I'm getting out while the getting's good."
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Part of me thought Ryan Day may do the same thing.
Yeah. All right, let's switch gears here to the Reds because it was a bit of a big week for the Reds. They had a few different moves. We'll run through them real quick and I'll get your thoughts. They acquired left-handed reliever Taylor Rogers in a trade with the Giants for minor leaguer Braxton Roxby. Rogers is 34. He has closing experience and could slide into that role for the Reds or potentially join a committee with Alexis Diaz. He excelled for the Giants last season, posting a 2.40 ERA in 60 innings while striking out 64 and walking 20. They also agreed to a minor league deal with left-handed pitcher Wade Miley, a familiar name for Reds fans. He's 38 years old. He spent the 2020-2021 seasons with the Reds. He was great in 2023, the last season he really pitched with the Brewers, had a 3.14 ERA and 23 starts, but then an elbow injury forced him to miss most of last year with Milwaukee. And then on Tuesday, they signed free agent outfielder Austin Hayes to a one-year deal worth $5 million. Hayes is 29. He's a right-handed batter. He's played all three outfield spots, will likely be in one of the two corner spots, but he was an all-star in 2023 with the Orioles prior to being traded to the Phillies last July. Skinny, that's a lot of words there. Break down what you thought about the three new additions.
Yeah, I mean, none of them are huge needle movers, if you will, but they've made the team better. I mean, Taylor Rogers is a quality pitcher, a left-handed quality pitcher. Wade Miley, probably in the pecking order of starters, is probably your eighth or ninth starter. I mean, if you get down to that level, would I rather have Wade Miley or Carson Spire starting? I'd probably rather have Wade Miley starting because of his experience. Do I think he slides into one of the five spots? I don't. I mean, I think there's in the pecking order, he's seventh, eighth in the pecking order at the moment. That's not an awful thing. And then Austin Hayes, listen, last year he dealt with a kidney ailment, had another medical issue as well. I don't think he's cleared his physical yet to join the Reds. He's not officially on the 40 man at the moment, I don't think. But let's just assume, for argument's sake, he does. He's career 800 OPS against left-handed pitching. I think that makes you a better team. It allows you to maybe straight platoon in the outfield, if you will. You have a whole right-handed hitting outfield and a whole left-handed hitting outfield. I don't think that's an awful thing. I think it's made this team better. Has it moved the needle to go, this is a World Series champ? No, but I think you've made your team better. I think the Gavin Lux team made your team better. I think Brady Singer makes your team better.
Which one out of these three new guys? For me, Taylor Rogers seems like the big get here. That's the guy that seems like you're still trying to make that bullpen a bit better, and he's the guy that gives you some real legitimacy in the back end. Whether I don't know if he's going to be a closer, I don't think he probably will, but even still, it gives you a legitimate, solid pitcher in the back end of that bullpen.
Yeah, I think 2022, I believe he had 31 saves over two teams, if I'm not mistaken. I think he had a bunch of them with the Padres that year. I think he had 28 of his saves that year with the Padres. But he's been durable. Now in the back end of your bullpen or in your bullpen, you've got Sam Maul, Brent Suter, and him, all lefties, to go along with a good chunk of righties. I mean, I think it's a good mix. I think this adds to it, makes it a very good mix in the bullpen.
And that's one thing where I'm fully on board with the, okay, great, you added Austin Hayes to the position players, and it's like, oh, great, well, where'd that get you? I mean, kind of another backup level type player that could fill in for you, and maybe that'll work, whatever. But it's still the whole you're not moving the needle with any of these additions thing. From a pitching standpoint, when you start talking about, the addition of Brady Singer, the addition of Taylor Rogers, I do think they have clearly made the pitching staff better this
I do
offseason. I'm
too.
starting to get excited about the depth they're building there.
And Rick, I think the point all along too is this, and nobody's going to want to hear it. In this whole rebuild process, you're still counting on Ellie De La Cruz to be a star, Matt McClain to be a star, Christian Encarnacion Strand to hit at the level he's always hit before he had to deal with the injury last year. I think that was always at the core of this, is that you're counting on those things. Whether that's right or not, only time's going to tell. But I think that when this whole thing's pieced together, you're counting on Matt McClain coming back to playing at 2023 level Matt McClain. You're counting on Encarnacion Strand to hit the way you expected him to hit. You're expecting Ellie to continue to get better, which is scary to think about. I think those are things you're counting on. Again, you can argue that, well, that's not exactly a plan.
Yeah.
Well, for those that are clamoring for the Luis Roberts of the world, I mean, is he the guy of 2 years ago, or is he the guy of last year who was just a disaster? You don't know that either. So again, if that's what they're counting on, I'm okay with that, and I think that's always been the plan.
Yeah, I'm not clamoring for Luis Roberts, but I also would say to that point, that's fine. That's your plan. And there is, I agree with that to some extent. Those guys have the potential still to break out. Last year wasn't what you wanted to be for really any of those guys for the most part, but there is still a lot of potential in some of those young guys. That being said, last year should have been an eye-opening experience that you never have enough. Just because you
No,
think you have
no,
some young talented guys, counting on all of them to pan out in the same year is a bad plan. So if that's all they're doing this year is like, well, actually, all three of those young guys that we thought were going to be stars a year ago that didn't pan out, they will actually be stars this year. That will not work. I promise you that. It will not. So maybe the idea is the pitching staff's going to be incrementally better and all those other guys are going to be incrementally better. And that gets you 10 more wins and it gets you closer to the cut. I don't know. And they're just going to try to be competitive this year. And that's enough for them. But to me, that's like the best case scenario. I don't think you've done anything that suggests you would be competing towards the top of your division.
yeah, but I just don't know, looking back on how this offseason unfolded for a lot of teams, what was out there that was going to that they could afford to go get to move the needle. Whether you like to hear that, not you personally, whether fans
Yeah.
like to hear that or not, I mean, it's just a fact of the matter. There is a payroll constriction there. You may not like it, you may not agree with it, but there just is. And so, working under the confines of that, I think they've made their team better.
As Mo Egger said eloquently yesterday on the radio, major league owners have done an incredible job of convincing everyone that they can't afford anything. And
Understood.
that's where we're at.
I get it, but I mean, us banging our shoe on the table to demand it isn't going to change it. It just,
True.
if you're Nick Kroll, you can't demand that. You can't beat the ownership up and go, I need more. No, if they say, here's your payroll, my guy, go make it work. Guess what you got to do? You better go try to make it work. And I think he's done a pretty good job of that.
Finally, with the Reds, wrapping up on this, what are your thoughts on Ellie De La Cruz being named a cover athlete for MLB The Show? I know that probably got you excited.
Yeah, here's what I did with this when I saw the story. Yeah,
That's a light shoulder shrug from
yeah,
Skinny if you're
yeah,
not watching this on
yeah. Sorry
YouTube.
about that. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I great for him. Great for him.
kudos to him.
Yeah. College basketball. Let's switch gears here. Normally, we like to start off with the team that maybe had the biggest win or the most noteworthy week, but this week, Skinny, I think we just have to start off talking about UC. It's all anyone's talking about right now. They've lost 3 in a row again. The last two at BYU, 80-52 on Saturday and 69-66 at Utah on Tuesday. They host West Virginia on Sunday at 2 p.m. The Bearcats are tied for 15th in the 16-team Big 12 now, Skinny. They are 2-7 in Big 12 play. They rank dead last in the conference in offensive efficiency, effective field goal percentage, and three-point percentage. Where are we at with this UC team, and how bad is this going to get?
It's got it. I mean, it could get worse, obviously, right? I mean, you don't win more than 2 or 3 more games the rest of the year would make it really bad. Um, And again, the worst part is I think you're sitting on a coach who's going to return because of finances. I think that's literally the only reason why he returns is they can't buy him out, and so you're stuck with this again. Um, I know everybody's clamoring for the savior for next year, Sean, however you pronounce his last name, Abayev. It's one guy. It's one guy. I mean, I think the point of this is this. I think everybody got over their skis with what they perceived was improved talent level, and it's basically just the same team as last year. I mean, this was what it is. It wasn't a very good team last year. It was scrappy. It gave you hope because it was scrappy and stayed in games, but it wasn't a very good team.
No, but Skinny, last year, they were in a bunch of one possession games where they were tough,
Understood.
they were scrapping. It looked like they were just a play or two away, and like maybe even just running it back with that same group of guys with a little more experience. Maybe they refine their skills a little bit, should be in a better position this year.
But
And yet,
guys have regressed. I mean,
that's
Jizzle James
that's
has regressed. Dan Skillings has regressed.
That's the big concern, Skinny. They've gotten worse since last year, and a lot of it is the same guy. Dan Skillings is the one. I'm not alone in this, but Dan Skillings is the one that just makes you say, "What the heck is going on?" Obviously, it's not just a coaching staff issue with Dan Skillings, but I mean, he's fallen off so badly this year and is so far away from being the player that everyone thought he might be like midway through last season. I don't know how that's even possible. Like, he looks nothing like a professional prospect right now, and I think there was a legitimate chance that he could have been an NBA draft pick a year ago.
Yeah, and I want to blame the knee, but I think our friend Chad Brendel from Bearcat Journal has kind of debunked that it's not the knee at the moment. I mean, I want to give the kid the benefit of the doubt that it's something physical, but if it's not, then what is it? What's the problem?
It is hard to put your brain around and make sense of when you watch this team. I do wonder, Skinny, the one thing, everyone wants to get in the X and O's and this guy can't coach, that guy can't coach. And a lot of times when I hear that stuff, it's like, well, one, just about any schematics will work in college athletics as long as you have the right coach, the right personnel, the right messages coming through, you're doing things the right way. I don't think there's one way to do it and another way will no longer work. So I roll my eyes a little bit when I hear a lot of the X and O talk coming from fans. But one thing I do wonder about UC with their offense struggling the way it does, and we just talked about the metrics, they're last in pretty much every important offensive metric in the conference. The lack of tempo, where it's like they run 16, 17, 18 seconds off the clock before they've even done any action. And then they kind of dribble over to one side of the floor and run one simple action. And then when that's dead, it's like now you're in an end of shot clock situation where the defense has to hold on for 4 more seconds and just force a contested shot by you. Not only is that difficult from a standpoint of like you're playing slow, it's hard to get your offense going and generate momentum that way, but also they never put any pressure on the other team. The other team doesn't have to guard multiple actions. They don't have to guard throughout the possession and keep moving. They're standing around a lot, gathering their breath and sort of re-energizing themselves. And the biggest part of it is you never put anyone in foul trouble. You don't draw any fouls. You don't get to the free throw line for any easy points. They're one of the last teams in the entire country in free throw attempts. And it's been that way every year of Wes Miller's tenure. At some point, why would you not look at that and say, our offense is struggling. Why don't we try to speed this up a little bit? Or at least, I'm not saying like you got to play at a faster pace on the offensive end and play shorter possessions, but I do think you have to get into your stuff and make the defense work earlier in possessions
Well,
to at least make them guard you.
the other thing too right now is you got nobody can create their own. I mean, Jizzle can
Exactly.
create his own. He just doesn't make. I mean, he can create his own. He just doesn't make any on his own. You got to create shots for the coaches. You got to create shots at times for Skillings, who I would think could go get his own on occasion, but just doesn't seem to be able to. Rick, this is crazy. The three hardest non-conference opponents they played, in my opinion. I mean, I think we'd agree with this. Nova, Xavier, Dayton, and then the nine Big 12 games. So the 12 hardest games, if you will, that they played this year. How many times do you think they've scored above 70 points in those 12?
2 times.
Once against Texas Tech when they lost 81-71. I
Wow.
mean, that just speaks volumes to me that you got to do something different. Whether that's different lineup combinations, whether to your point changing the pace of play, whether it's trying to get some points off of your defense, you got to do something different because 12 games worth of that is pretty notable in my opinion. That whatever you're doing ain't working.
Yeah, and then the other thing that would have driven me nuts as a UC fan from a coaching standpoint is when Day Thomas got that flagrant 2 the other night in a key moment of that game at Utah. He
Ripped his
made a
leg.
boneheaded play and he just throws a guy out of bounds and gets ejected from the game. He comes off the court, he gets a pat on the head and a pat on the back as he leaves the game, and it's like everyone's clapping up for him. I don't understand that at all. I mean, that's one of the dumbest plays I've seen, and everyone watching knew he had done something stupid. Whether it was going to be a flagrant one or flagrant two didn't matter. It was a stupid play that he just kind of lost his mind for a second and threw another player out of the possession. That that's a killer moment in a brutal, desperate stretch for your team, and your guys are just making boneheaded, selfish mistakes like that, and you're like clapping it up and patting them on the head. I don't
The optics are bad.
uh, accountability is big with these teams. I mean, we saw that kind of when Sean Miller got here with that first year with Xavier. That stuff does matter. Putting these guys in a box and telling them, this is what you are good at. This is what you should do. And by the way, we don't deal with any of that other nonsense too. Really does matter at this level. I know it's hard in the NIL era where guys tell you they're going to leave as soon as you don't tell them everything they want to hear and their parents want to fight you on it. But you're not going to win games if you can't hold them accountable.
No, I mean, and I'll go back to Dan to Skillings. I mean, he doesn't show a ton of effort defensively. Um, he doesn't appear to be that willing of a rebounder. It seems like he likes to go get offensive rebounds. Doesn't seem to be that willing of a defense. So to the accountability portion of it, at what point do you go, you know what? I'm not going to take this any. If you're not going to give me effort on defense, I'm not going to play you. I don't care what you're making. I don't care probably how important you might be in theory to our team. I'm not going to play you. And maybe it is a whole accountability thing across the board where you know, they don't rebound worth a damn. I mean, show some toughness. I mean, they're terrible on the glass. Terrible.
And that's supposed to be their MO. Their thing
Right.
is supposed to be toughness and defense. And when you don't have one of those major pillars, I mean, you're a disaster, which is what they are
I
right
mean,
now.
you can't play Aziz and Dylan Mitchell together. You just can't.
Let's be honest. Aziz Bandego, they fought so hard to get that guy last year and then get him eligible. He's really hurt them each of the last two seasons. Planning so much of what they're doing around him and him not being a high major level player has really been a problem for them.
Yeah, somebody on this podcast said that when they got him. I can't remember who that was.
You were all over it relentlessly every game, and you took a lot of heat for that, and you were dead on. Skinny, here's something that I've been kicking around as it relates to this whole Wes Miller thing, because again, we brought it up multiple times, but after this year, past March 31st, if they were to fire him, it's 13 million. Still, they'd have to pay him. After next year through the 31st, it's still about 10 million. So why that number is significant is because that's like middle of the portal. The 31st is like the middle of the transfer portal. Chances are you're not firing a coach after that date and giving your new head coach 1 or 2 weeks left of the transfer portal to put together a roster. So it feels like you've got Wes Miller for either the next 2 seasons, or they're going to have to bite a huge, huge financial bullet to settle with him and get him out of here.
Just don't know if they can do that. But man,
so
what a
that's
boneheaded
hold
move
on.
by
That's what
John
I want to
Paul.
ask you something about that though. So every season now is like a new season for these coaches and building their roster, right? I mean, there's just not much carryover to really plan around from year to year. That makes continuity less of a selling point to keep a coach, in my opinion. In other words, like the idea that, no, we're not going to get rid of this guy yet because we might lose the roster if he leaves. It's like, who cares? You lose most of your roster every year through the transfer portal anyway. And if the coach isn't doing well, you're probably going to lose even more than usual. So I think that is no longer a selling point. But I also think it kind of makes it easier to maybe stomach a coach who's on a big buyout for one more year, like Wes Miller. I'm curious where you come out on that. Because like in a certain way, you can look at this and say, well, I mean, you can just flip the entire roster over next year and hopefully they do a better job of putting it together next time, right?
I mean, that's the hope, but what would give you hope from any team he's ever coached? I mean, again, he coached a mid major for what 12 years and did okay. It was, I mean, if you look at the resume, it wasn't like over the top great. It was okay. And so far, you see, that's the part. This isn't like, hey, you got to give him 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Not anymore. No, you don't. And that I mean, now we're deep into the Wes Miller era, and you got nothing to show for it other than him getting a boneheaded extension after they lost to Xavier the 1 year because the AD wanted to puff out his chest and say, "That's my guy." Well, guy, you should fall too.
That's the real thing for Cincinnati is you've got a basketball coach that needs fired, a football coach that almost certainly needs fired,
and an AD.
And the AD was the one who hired both of them and screwed it all up and really has screwed up just about everything he's touched since he's been there, which we told everyone that was a disaster as it was happening. Like when they were changing coaches last time, we were like, this is not being handled well. This is not going to go well for Cincinnati. And it's played out that way. How do you handle this? You've got a huge buyout for the AD that you have to pay if you're going to get rid of him. You've got a huge buyout if you get rid of the football or basketball coach. You can't let the same AD make a new hire for either of those two sports. So it's like, you're bleeding money right now. I really don't know what you do.
Yeah, I feel bad for UC fans because, in my opinion, you're stuck. You're stuck for a couple of years. Stuck in a
especially if you're
bad
just a
way.
basketball fan, because it feels like Wes is probably like the least of the problems right now out of the three
Yeah,
in a
right.
weird way.
Yeah, in a weird way. You're right.
All right, let's move on to Xavier. They beat number 19 UConn 76-72 at the Cintas Center over the weekend, but then lost at Creighton 86-77 on Wednesday night. They will host Georgetown on Tuesday at 8:30. Xavier's in a really weird spot, Skinny, because I mean, obviously they lost at Creighton, but it was a close game. They played pretty well.
Yeah.
They're playing well enough right now that they're deserving of support from the fan base, and the fan base should be excited about the way they're playing. And they look like an NCAA tournament team the way they are playing right now. The problem is they also played themselves into a spot where there's a really good chance they're not going to make the NCAA tournament.
Will 7-2 be enough?
It puts them on the bubble, it puts them in the conversation, but it's not necessarily enough.
I mean, they're right on the outside looking in from bracket matrix at the moment. So I'm thinking 7-2 is enough, in my opinion.
I think they'll be on that cut line the entire way,
I do
assuming they
too.
continue to win games. If they lose 2 or 3 or whatever the rest of the way, then yeah, you're
No, I think
probably
if you
out of
look,
the
yeah,
mix.
you lose three or more, I think you're Big East tournament or bust at that point. And that's probably right, unfortunately. But you're right. They looked the part at the moment, but they dug themselves such a hole. I even said, remember four games ago, I said, could you get one more in January? Well, they got two. I was thinking, could you get one more? That would maybe put you in. Now that you got two, I think 7-2 gets them in.
And they're playing well enough that that's conceivable for sure.
Yes.
They could do that, but it's also 7-2 in the Big East is not going to
No,
be easy.
it's
I mean,
not
there's
easy.
still at
No.
least one game that they're not expected to win based on Ken Pom. And Ken Pom, when you project out the fact that, there's only a couple slight wins or games that are predicted in their favor right now, it equals out to Ken Pom expects them to lose a few more games.
Yeah,
So
I mean, look, I counted the at Providence as a win a couple of weeks ago, and now I'm looking at Providence playing better at home. And maybe that's not as easy as I thought. But again, it's not supposed to be easy. You've dug yourself a hole to not make it easy. So I think 7-2 is enough. And if you do that, pat on the back. If you don't, well, then the hole you dug was simply too much.
what did you think about John Hughley's
Yeah.
turnaround, at least for one night at
I was
Creighton?
going to ask you. I mean, 14-6 last night against Creighton. My word, that's. I don't know if you're going to get that every night, but that's huge. If you can get close to some of that, get you. Can he get you 8-5 on some nights now?
And, well, for me, it's almost not even like I don't even worry about the points because is he going to throw in 2 3-pointers in most games like he did against Creighton, where the game plan is, hey, Ryan Kalkbrenner is going to be in drop coverage. We want our bigs to pick and pop and shoot some threes. Well, Hughley took advantage of that and threw two of them in early, and that helped his confidence. He won't do that most times. But aside from that, he played defense. He was guarding Ryan Kalkbrenner. He had some really good moments. He was competent. He was physical. He stayed on his feet for longer than 30 seconds at a time. He grabbed a couple of rebounds that were, not right to him falling into his chest. That was a guy that can give you serviceable minutes in the Big East. For the rest of this entire season, he has been completely unplayable in competitive basketball games at the Division I level. So I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out. Is it's like, was this fool's gold? Was this he threw in a couple of threes and that just got him enough confidence to get through the game? Or is this what Sean Miller tried to tell us all along, that this guy will get better? He said it would be closer to Christmas time or New Year's. Turns out it's taken longer than that. But are we starting to see this guy potentially turn a corner?
Yeah, I mean, if Sean Miller believed that, and again, the timeline is off by a little bit, then maybe you're seeing what he thought he was going to get eventually when this guy got himself in decent, at least decent enough shape to give you some extended minutes. Again, we've seen that happen tons of times, right? One guy has it's a one-off night where, to your point, you throw in a couple shots you normally don't throw in and probably won't throw in again. But at the end of the day, can he get you 6 to 8 and 5 rebounds? If he does that, that's a huge bonus off that bench.
Well, and Sean Miller said after the game that he brought up that sometimes it can be something like this for a guy where he plays well late in the season when the team's counting on him, and that just sparks him. He starts going
Well,
and he plays well the rest of the year.
Jerome Hunter from a couple years ago, right? I mean,
Good example.
he came on like gangbusters. In fact, in the NCAA tournament, he was actually a go-to threat in the post.
Yeah, and with John, it's even a little bit more interesting because it does feel like so much of this is mental for him. It felt like he had no confidence and didn't even really know where he was in most games this year. And yet, over 2 years ago, as a sophomore, we saw him at Pitt starting and dominating in the ACC. He was an all ACC player and averaged like 15 points a game as a starter at Pittsburgh. So it's not like He's never been able to do this. And it's not like there's no ability inside of him there. He's completely fallen off and he's not been nearly that same player for over 2 years. But you do wonder if mentally, if he just gets right and gets on the right page, he is healthy now physically, who knows? Maybe. And the big thing why this matters is not just because of this year, but they have him for another year
Right,
potentially
right.
if they keep him around next year. So you're trying to figure out at the end of this year, like, is it worth paying this guy what you paid him this past year to bring him back next season and make him a part of your front court, or is it really just a flash in the pan and you're going to be dealing with what you just dealt with this whole season of a guy on the bench who really isn't anyone who can take up minutes for you?
It could be big down that stretch of 9 games. I mean, if he can give you something, that's a huge bonus.
And then what about Kentucky, who actually had the biggest week of all from a positive standpoint? Number 12, Kentucky won at number 8, Tennessee, 78-73. But that's not just the story there. They did it without Lamont Butler and Andrew Carr, who are, arguably two of their best 3 or 4 players.
Yeah.
They're really good. They're really important. They will host Coach Cal in Arkansas on Saturday at 9 in their next game. Skinny, how did they pull this off without Andrew Carr and Lamont Butler? Because I thought maybe they were almost just punting on this game as an idea of, hey, we're probably not going to win it anyway. Let's just show the committee we didn't have 2 of our best players, and maybe they'll kind of like discount that loss a little bit.
Yeah, I will say this for those that maybe got over the skis with the Vanderbilt loss. Vanderbilt's really good. They're an NCAA tournament team in my opinion. I think they're really, really good. And you got yourself a hole. You dug back out of it to take a 7-point lead, and then just made some bad mistakes down the stretch, some bad turnovers down the stretch. So that being said, didn't in my wildest dreams, even with a full roster, think they could go to Tennessee and win. Maybe it's a case. I had somebody say this to me, and it happens sometimes. The rotation gets shortened by default, and everybody gets some extra minutes, and they shine in those extra minutes for whatever reason. It's so odd. 2 of their biggest wins this year, the Tennessee game and the Gonzaga game, they didn't have Lamont Butler, who I've said is my favorite player on this team. I think he's the biggest part of this team. They've had to have Jackson Robinson play the point in both of those games, and he did just fine.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We're finding out like Jackson Robinson's fine handling the ball and making decisions if you need him to play that role. In fact, in some ways, for a guy who sometimes can be too passive, it's kind of nice to put the ball in his hands a little bit more often at different points. So the other thing, Skinny, that I just cannot get over is Ansley Almanor is like the perfect transfer portal addition. He is what every team is looking for. A guy that is solid, a veteran, he's steady, but most importantly, he's unselfish in his role. He understands, like, I'm coming in to be a bench guy. I'm not going to be the feature every night, but when I get called upon, when I get a little more of an expanded role in a big game, man, can you rely on me? He just hits big shot after big shot in these big games.
I was going to say I was trying to look at his game log, and it doesn't have his shooting, but he made a couple, maybe 3 or 4 against Vandy. He made 4 against Tennessee, and it's not high volume. I mean, he's 4 for 7 against Tennessee. I think 4 for 6 against Vandy. It's pretty good. And yeah, I mean, it's when the ball gets swung and he finds himself open, he'll make the shot. If not, he's not forcing much. I mean, he was one of the double figure, 5 in double figures the other night. He's one of the 5, and he's probably in a full roster setting. He's the 8th or 9th guy.
And that's what, when you're trying to get these guys from Fairleigh Dickinson as a high major team, this is what you're hoping for, is that, like, on paper, it's like, oh yeah, we'll have depth. Look at this guy who's going to come in. He was solid, or he was great for them. He'll be solid at our level and he'll play this role for us. But then you get these guys on your roster and it's like, well, they had other plans. They were expecting to be one of your starters. They're expecting to play better. Now they lost confidence. Now it's not working out. And you spoil their last year of eligibility and they never end up really doing much for you. He has been the exact opposite of that. He came in understanding what he was going to be, and the coaching staff has done a great job of keeping him ready and engaged. And I mean, man, he just delivers every time you call on him, it feels like.
Yeah, and I will say that win quelled the fan base, that the hands were starting to ring a little bit, right? They were starting to worry about the Arkansas game, and can this team finish at 500 in the SEC? And it's still going to be grueling to get to 10 or 11 wins in this league. They still have to play at Ole Miss. They got a return game with Tennessee. Got to play at Texas. Got a return game at home with Vandy. Got to play at Bama. Got to play Auburn still. Got to play at Missouri. I mean, it is still a gauntlet left for them. But that win was huge. They continue to pile up huge quad one wins. I mean, it's still there was actually, I was listening to a talk show the other day, and a couple of callers actually, I don't even know if we're going to make the tournament. I'm like, relax.
What?
I mean, yeah, exactly. They're still a 3 seed at the moment from bracket matrix. They were never going to fall out of the tournament. Could they have slipped to the seed line? Yeah, and they still could. But boy, they got a lot of big wins on that resume.
It's funny, Skinny. It's almost to the point with UK where I'd rather them play the big, tough
Right.
hard game that you think they have no chance at than I would like the Vandy's and Missouris of the world, because those are the games they slip. The big games, they show up every single
I
time. The
mean,
only one they've lost is Bama.
yeah, and that was a great game. I mean,
It was a
Bama
great
just
game.
made a handful of plays better, and Bama's really, really good. Tennessee was number one. They still might be. They were number one in the country in KenPom defensively going in that, and Kentucky goes and scores 78 on their court.
Without their point guard and without Andrew Carr.
Right,
I
right.
mean, it's
That's
just
crazy. Crazy.
that's an incredible win by Kentucky.
Now, I
Hats
will tell
off
you,
to the Wildcat
it
fans.
didn't hurt that Tennessee went 11 of 45 on threes. And I watched the last probably 8 minutes because we had a game that night, the high school team where I coach. So we went after the game and watched the last 8 or 10 minutes. There were a lot of clean looks that they missed. I mean, let's face facts, and you got to have that happen sometimes too.
They did, but I don't think we've really mentioned him. Give Kentucky credit, because when you go on the road and you play in a big game like that, you have to be the tougher team. You have to take care of the little things. And Amari Williams set the tone for them with
15
that.
rebounds.
10 points and 15 rebounds. It was like, we're the bigger, tougher team in the paint tonight.
Yeah, no, now they missed a couple of them. I think there was one sequence where Tennessee missed a shot, got at least 2 offensive rebounds, and I think Kentucky knocked it out on the third. There were a couple of sequences like that because this is not a great rebounding team. In fact, it's not a very good rebounding team. But to your point, Amari Williams getting 15 was huge.
Well, yeah, and that's why it's so impressive, because it's like when you're not that type of team, you have to show up and set that tone, and he did that for them. All right, great college basketball segment. I enjoyed that. Let's wrap it up with some Ask Skinny Anything here. What is your favorite advanced baseball metric and why, Skinny?
I guess WAR, because it does come across, it does cross all the lines. I'm not sure I completely fully understand WAR, but it's a comparative number, I guess. For hitters, OPS seems to me to be the one. I still go back to, I would love to see this factored into it's not even, I guess, slugging percentage, because slugging percentage is based on total bases, right? I mean, that's why home run hitters usually have a good slugging percentage, and that's factored into OPS. Tell me if I'm wrong on this. Why couldn't you add a stolen base to total bases when you've stolen an extra base? And then if you get caught stealing, you take a base away. So if I get a single, right, I get 1. I mean, that's 1 divided by 1. If I stretch that into a double, I get 2. Why isn't it if I get a single and then steal that base, do I not get credit for that extra base?
You should.
I know. I'd like to go back and factor that, because a lot of times the whole stolen base is overrated. No, it's really not. If we can factor it into some of the equations, why can't we factor it in?
Well, and that's the other thing with, like, baseball is so funny to me, because out of all the sports, and the advanced metrics have taken over in all of them, but of all the sports that we just decide advanced metrics are gospel and it's the only way to judge players, it's the end all be all.
All the advanced metric guys are, you're not looking at the right numbers. Shut up.
Yeah, and they look at a million different things, but here's the funny thing. It's the only one where we just accept, like, every advanced metric as it's the gospel and it tells us everything we need to know. In every other sport, we're like, yeah, that shows us one side of it, but you also got to factor in this and the other thing. It's like, like defensive rebounding percentage or something like that. It's like, well, yeah, there's other factors there, In baseball, it's really weird how we're just like, yeah, no, this is, all of these numbers can be manipulated. They can make up a story to say anything you want them to say. And yet in baseball, it's like, well, that guy's WAR, that guy's BABIP isn't enough. So we're good. Yeah, baseball. Talking about baseball sucks because of advanced.
It does. Honestly, it's lost the art, I guess, of it. It's turned into such a geeky science that it's sometimes it's not much fun to hear, read, or talk about. It really isn't.
It's not, because anytime you read, they're going into all these numbers. Then if you try to have a conversation with someone, you're like, well, this guy's better than that guy. It's like, well, hold on, let me pull up his baseball reference and look at his BABIP number first.
His exit velocity.
Yeah. In honor of the SLU VCU fan fight, what's the craziest thing Skinny has ever seen a fan do during a game he was covering? That fight was great, by the way.
That was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so from a fan fight perspective,
well, just anything you've seen fans do that's crazy.
Funny. I'm not sure I've been involved in anything like that. I really, and you'd think I would have, but I really can't think of anything off the top of my head.
No fans getting intimate that you saw or anything?
Well,
I caught that once.
Okay, well, not at a game, but at a tailgate, a Buffalo Bills tailgate. A couple were getting after it in front of God and everybody.
Yeah, I saw not intercourse, but a little I saw a little bit of that going on one time. Some PDA, if you will.
I not only saw it, but I saw a group of people, because I was driving by. I literally dropped my buddy off to go to a different tailgate as we're stopped at this light while I'm letting him off. He goes, "Look over there for a second." I turn my head and I go, "Oh my heavens, okay." So yeah, I guess that would be crazy, but it wasn't in a game. It was in the tailgate portion of the
Remember
game.
remember when we had the Ferris wheel downtown and then the
Oh
couple
yeah,
got arrested for doing it after, opening day?
yes, yes,
That was a great storyline.
yes,
So I was
indeed,
working at Channel 12 at the time. It was a great day in local news.
yes. Did we ever find out what car number that was?
Yeah, I wrote it about 10 times afterwards.
Okay,
It was,
okay,
a
yeah.
number 69, I believe. What does Skinny think of the reporter that didn't vote Ichiro in to the Hall of Fame? Should he be outed and have his voting right revoked?
I don't think you have your voting right revoked, but I don't think there's anything wrong with transparency. Honestly, I'd like to know the reason why. I mean, if you've got a good reason for it, I'm willing to listen to it.
Yeah, that's my thing. I absolutely everyone's vote should be made public, I think. I think we should know who you voted for. And then the only issue you get into that with.
And a good chunk of them actually do nowadays. They'll say, "Here's my Hall of Fame ballot, and good for you." I think that's a good thing.
Right. The only issue you get into with that is people start doing it for the clout. They want to be the contrarian. They want people to bring it up that like, oh, you didn't vote for Ichiro, so now I'll have you on to talk about it. So I do get a little bit of concerned about making a more public thing because you'll have more people just trying to be clickbaity with their decision. But I don't know why people care so much about like whether Ichiro was a unanimous Hall of Famer or not. That just doesn't. I mean, when you
No, but
Mo
again, I go
ran
back.
off a bunch of names the other day, or Lance, someone did, where they were naming off all the big time Hall of Famers that weren't unanimous Hall of Famers. It's like, well, why do we care then? I don't understand.
Yeah, I guess the question is for those that don't vote for some of those guys, like a Hank Aaron or a Willie Mays, etc. Did you have a good reason? If you did, I'm willing to listen to it. Or was it just nope? Don't think they should be. I do think there's that guy out there that goes, no, nobody can be unanimous. We had one. We should have never had any. I'll make sure that that's the case. He's going to get in even with or without. No, that's not a good reason to me.
Yeah, that's loser behavior. That's hater
I mean, listen,
behavior there.
who would not have voted for Willie Mays or Hank Aaron? I'm just using two examples.
Right.
Who in the right mind? If they could have given me a reason, sure, that's fine. Give me whatever. I don't know what your reason could be.
What's the best argument against Ichiro? Like if you were trying to make the argument that he's not Hall of Famer, there's just no power. Like he's just a slap
Yeah,
hitter.
I mean, the OPS isn't off the charts, right? But I mean, good lord. I mean, the consistency of hitting his defense, his arm. I mean, he didn't even come over here until he was what 27 years old and still
Yeah,
wound up with 3,000 plus hits.
yeah. He already had like 2,000 hits before he ever came
Yeah,
over here, didn't he?
yeah. No, again, if you want to give me a reason, guy, the one guy who did, I'll listen. I don't think you're going to make a very compelling argument, but if it's just because I just don't believe somebody should be unanimous, that's not a good reason.
Ichiro is one of those athletes that's actually like iconic in my lifetime. Like when I think about, the guys you grow up with, the guys who are video games, guys wore their jerseys, they were just a fixture throughout your childhood and as you were coming up. Ichiro is one of those guys for me, I would say. Like he was a huge
Yep.
star, was on all the video games, backyard baseball, all that stuff when we were growing up.
I did like the fact that he said he wanted to sit down and have a beer with the guy who didn't vote for him just to listen to what the reason was.
I would too.
Yeah.
Let's hear it. And we'll wrap it up with this. What's one thing about Skinny that most people wouldn't know?
Holy cow. Boy, that's a great question.
Do you have any weird hobbies? Anything that you're into that we don't know about?
No,
Here's
no.
the problem with this. I feel like we've asked all the questions on this podcast, so it feels like we all know about it by now,
Yeah,
probably.
no, I was going to say, I'm trying to think what that would be. I don't have one.
We know you're a coach. That takes up a lot of your free time.
It does. Gosh, I got nothing for this one. I'm trying to think what that would be. I've talked about um, how angry of a driver I can be,
Yep.
and how I try to hold people responsible on the road. I don't know. I honestly don't.
All right. Well,
Here, I'll give you this. I broke into a house when I was 5 years old. True
well,
story.
also, didn't you get the cops chasing you when you were older for breaking into a friend's house?
No, no. Yeah, they were chasing us for that. Actually, it's funny. So I'll give you all these stories. So
Give us both of them real quick.
5-year-old me living in Erlanger on Fairwood Court in Erlanger. I was out playing, I guess, in the front yard one day when 3 teenage boys came along and said, "Hey, we'll give you, I think it was $5 if we lift you through this window and you let us in." I'm so damn naive. I did it. Got busted for it. They got far more trouble than me. I got in
You
trouble from
think?
my mom and dad, but I was a 5-year-old thief. I feel awful. And it was my mom and dad's best friends. It was our neighbors across the street.
Remind me not to let my son hang out with you. He doesn't need
Yeah,
any bad ideas. We're already a little
exactly.
worried.
Yeah, no, the time that so we went into a friend's house. It was gone on vacation because we knew they left the door unlocked, and we borrowed a fifth of Jack Daniels and for whatever reason a box of Zesta crackers. We were actually camping out in my backyard. There was like 8 of us, and
You
so
borrowed.
yeah, so some guys went down the hill to there used to be a Dunkin' Donuts across from Dixie Heights High School. It's now a Subway, but it was a Dunkin' Donut back in the day. So
Yep.
they walked down the hill from where I lived in Crestview Hills to get something to mix these things. Don't ask me why I didn't go in my own house to get mixers. They decided to go down the hill to get mixers. So they go get the mixers, come back. So we go end up drinking in another neighbor's driveway. And lo and behold, we didn't know this at the time. Some other kid in the neighborhood was taking pot shots with a BB gun at stuff, took a pot shot at this house. Well, that's what caused the cops to come. Of course, we thought they were coming because we had a fifth of liquor underage and whatnot. So we all scattered. Um, we all kind of tried to meet back at my house. One friend, like an idiot, ran right back to the backyard, jumped in a sleeping bag to pretend the cops saw him and told him, so they're all waiting at my house. So we all go back to my house, and the cops are there. My mom and dad are there. That did not end well for me. That was probably junior year of high school me. That did not end well for me.
Tough night at the Skinner household.
Yes. But that was the one thing we did prove that we weren't the ones that shot at the house. That was because they thought that was us, and we're like, no, we were just out drinking this fifth of Jack Daniels. We're doing what you want, and they ended up I think catching the kids that were shooting the BB gun.
Also, in one of the stranger fates that occur, like Jim Kelch and I, who broadcast together, have the same birthday. We're both
Oh
August
wow,
9th. You and I, who do this podcast together, we grew up on the same exact street.
crazy. That is crazy.
Like 15 years apart, 20 years apart, whatever, but grew
Yep.
up on the same street. It was just very strange. So,
Yes, indeed.
all
Yeah.
right, that's all we got.
We got it. Appreciate the questions as always. We'll be back next week. We'll preview the Super Bowl, much more college basketball, Reds inching closer to the start of spring training, and much, much more. For Rick Brewing, I'm Richard Skinner. It's been the Skinny Podcast, the weekly potpourri edition, presented by Blake the Attorney Maislin.